Oh, hey, everybody. Okay, here we are in front of a raucous crowd. Just to what we always do. This is a workshop, which is not the formal city council meeting. That will be next Monday. And this one the council does its preparation for full meetings. And let's just go through and do our roll call. So I happen to see Council Member Rhodes, Council Member Weatherby, Council Member Mansfield, and myself, the mayor. Online, I believe we have, who's there?
Paloma.
Hi.
All right.
Paloma Waka here.
All right.
And Amber is here as well.
Amber. Hey. So that's council members Wake and Grant. So we're 6 here. Council member Demansky is excused. Okay. And we've got the city attorney, Nick Ward Willis here, and the city administrator, Chris White. First item is a discussion of commercial property in the Fishkill Creek Development Zone. I just want to introduce and thank Adam Bosch, who's the CEO of Patterns for Progress. They are a Hudson Valley planning and development organization. They've been at it. Did you just have your 60th anniversary?
Yeah, we just had our 60th anniversary celebration last Tuesday. What's today, Monday?
Yeah.
6 days ago.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
6
So
days ago.
I just want to say thank you for coming. You've
Yeah.
been doing this for a long, long time in terms of working in the Hudson Valley, and I'm just very appreciative of your willingness to be here. I understand you had something going on in Westchester, and so you
That's
could
right.
make this work, so thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And it's funny, I mentioned I had dinner with my parents on the way here, and of course, my mom and dad were both born and raised in Newburgh. So, of course, I say I'm going to Beacon, and my dad can't help himself, but feel the need to share that he used to work at the Ice House on Lake Street in Newburgh, and that was before modern snowmaking machines were made. So, part of the ways they used to get snow up on Mount Beacon when there was the ski center up there, and up on the West Point Ski Hill was they would come over to the ice house where my dad worked and have finely shaved ice and shovel it onto the ski hill. So, of course, when your dad reaches a certain age, he repeats this story multiple times. So I figured I would share it here tonight as a nice way to start my discussion. So Lee and Chris had briefed me on some decisions that you may have to make about some properties that were zoned for mixed use but have a mechanism within the zoning code where you can potentially allow those developers to develop those properties as residential instead. So I just wanted to come and offer some thoughts based on what we see across the region, what we know about capitalizing development right now in the region, and I'll share some details about Main Street retail environments in a moment. I want to just start by saying when I come and talk to city councils or town councils or village councils, I always like to express that I'm not here to try to nudge you in any particular direction, but what I am here to do is try to share with you a regional perspective from our planning work and our research work so that hopefully you can make a decision that you feel like is well informed, okay? So that's my goal. Also, I want to say that right now I'm very fortunate to be working on a project for Empire State Development with a planner named Larissa Ortiz. Some of you may have heard her name. She used to be on the New York City Planning Commission. She owned her own firm for a while. She worked at a national firm called Street Sense, and she would be embarrassed if she heard me say this, but she is one of the best downtown retail planners in the country. She's done the downtown retail plans for Denver and Cleveland and Palo Alto and Old San Juan. She's really, really smart. So because we're working together, I poked her brain on this last week for about 15 minutes. She's very familiar with Beacon. She lives down in Nyack. So some of what I'm going to say, I'm frankly not stealing from Larissa, but it was the result of our brainstorming on the telephone the other day. So I want to just share this to start. Generally speaking, most small cities like Beacon can sustain in their downtown along their main street somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 linear feet of double-sided mixed use, which means you have that mixed use on both sides of your main street. Over time, that will shrink and expand a little based on different forces. That will expand and shrink a little bit based on how the market's doing, population and demographic factors, and other factors. But that's generally the standard In this era of digital retail, when our main streets have moved to more of a destination type retail rather than a goods and services and essentials type retail, although we still have things like pharmacies and hardware stores in our downtowns. So just level setting with that. 1,500 to 2,000 linear feet is generally what a small city like Beacon can sustain in terms of a reasonably vibrant downtown bottom floor retail environment. If you look at your main street from where it starts at the traffic light down to the intersection with Churchill, you actually have about exactly double that. You have about 4,000 linear feet of double-sided mixed use. As you get deeper, it's not all mixed use. Obviously, you know you have some that are standalone buildings, more like pad sites that you typically see outside small cities. And you have what we would consider like a very common cadence of use along the main street, which is like a very active node, and then kind of a lull, and then a very active node, and then some vacancy. That's very typical of what we see in main streets like yours across the Hudson Valley. So let's consider a few facts when it comes to downtowns and how they develop, and importantly, how they sustain themselves. The farther away you get away from a core destination driver, for some people that might be a performing arts center or a museum or something that brings people into town regularly, the farther away you get from a core destination driver, the harder it is to sustain that bottom floor retail. The farther you get away from housing, the harder it is to sustain that retail. The farther away you get, in your case, from a train or something like that, the harder it is to sustain that retail. So just to level set, Beacon is sustaining about twice the total linear feet of ground floor retail and commercial space, as we see in typical similar downtowns throughout the Hudson Valley, both south of you and north of you. I also want to take just a minute to talk about capital, because to build anything, we always need to be thinking about capital and funding and lending, some mix of lending and equity, and sometimes incentives. As you probably know, it's really, really hard right now in the Hudson Valley to capitalize development of just about any kind. In fact, I've been sharing with people, there's kind of a general rule out there right now that developers need at least 2 of the big 4 to really capitalize just about building anything now. What are those big 4? Brownfield tax credits, historic tax credits, some kind of ESD, grant or incentive, or in the case of housing, low-income housing tax credits or some similar program. Those are the big 4. And generally speaking, again, I'm making a generalization, if you don't have 2 of those 4, it's really, really hard to stitch together enough financing in the current environment to pay for anything that you might want to build. And that's because we know the 4 L's that go into building anything: land, lumber, lending, and labor, right? Land, lumber, lending, and labor. And right now, all those costs are very high. We know that land acquisition costs are very high. We know that material costs are very high, especially for things like lumber and gypsum board and HVAC components. Very, very high costs right now. Lending is still relatively high, although, right, we have some expectations that that'll be coming down with some interest rate cuts. Labor is high. And then there's also the soft costs that are involved, consultants and going through the land use process, which now that California has made some changes to its version of seeker, we are probably the highest in the country, quite frankly, for that as well. And I'd say it's especially hard to capitalize sort of your classic downtown mixed-use project right now because of some nuances in the lending markets, okay? Banks, many banks, not all of them, but many of the regional and local banks have really trimmed back the kind of commercial lending that goes to those kinds of buildings. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is there is a large amount of vacant downtown storefront space in the region already. So there are concerns about oversaturating an already saturated market that has a lot of space out there that still needs to be absorbed. A lot of commercial lending on the books already by local banks. And in fact, banks that are involved in Pattern, either through our membership or through our board, at least 2 of them have talked to me about regulators forcing them to sell off a lot of their commercial debt recently because they were over leveraged on this kind of lending. And that's something that a lot of them are focused on. It's seen as bad debt. In other words, they're just overexposed on that sort of stuff. And those sorts of buildings are not as in high a demand relative to the supply that already exists out there in the market. And then a lot of them are just focusing their lending on residential because, as you know, huge demand, very fast absorption in the market, a fairly guaranteed return if they lend that money out for that purpose. So when you set up a zoning code that requires mixed use, it might work in some parts of Main Street. I want to be clear about that. But other parts, you might be sort of zoning yourself out of activity because the owners and developers simply can't put enough capital together, enough lending to build the type of space at this time and under these regional and national circumstances.
So Adam, if I
Yeah.
can just add a little bit about the zone that
Yep.
that we're interested in. So it's not our Main Street zone.
Yep,
It's
that's right.
along our creek.
Correct.
And interestingly, our creek sort of crosses Main Street.
Yep.
And so
Sort of
there's
like a T,
there's
right?
sections kind of near Main Street, and then there's sections, much further away.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's, I know it's not on your Main Street, but it's kind of like the T on the back end of your Main Street. So subject to all the same forces I just talked about, right? Anything you do there with commercial, if it were to build, would tug on the forces that are keeping the things you have surviving and thriving. So lastly, I just want to share two other ideas that I think are a little more qualitative, a little less quantitative, a little less based on research, but they're more based on what we've seen in a lot of our projects over the past several years. The first is that we often see municipal planning and zoning focused on kind of a binary choice. What do we want and what do we not want, right? We know zoning is a tool that only restricts, right? Zoning doesn't tell you what you can do, it only tells you what you can't do. And we see a lot of the planning and zoning work across the region really focused on that binary choice. What do we want and what do we not want? But there's another question that kind of gets lost in that way of thinking, and that question is, what do we already have that we want to keep, right? What do we already have that we want to keep and strengthen, and what choices can we make to give us the best chance of keeping those things and strengthening those things that make our communities, great the way they are and places that we love. So, I'll venture and educate a guess that one of the things we like about Main Street and the area along the creek is that you have restaurants you like and artisans that are doing business along Main Street. That local business activity that you have there is something that's really great. And sometimes it's the wrong question really to ask, hey, can we make more of this, right? And the right question instead is to ask ourselves, what decisions give us the best shot at keeping this stuff? Right? Not making more of it, but keeping the stuff that we have. And in this case, when you bookend your business district with housing, you're actually guaranteeing a bigger customer base within walking distance of those businesses. That might mean a few extra $1,000 going into those businesses every week. That might mean the difference between surviving or really struggling in those months that we know are hard for everybody, February, March, right? Those months that tend to be really difficult on our local businesses. And you're increasing the likelihood that you'll be able to keep those things you love simply by putting more people there who will love it along with you and spend some money there and ensure that those businesses are viable for a longer term. So don't think, when you think about this trigger mechanism or this release valve or whatever you want to call it in your zoning code, don't think of it as like a loss or a defeat or this binary decision between, yes or no. Also try to think about, hey, what can we do? What decisions can we make? What things can we tell or ask developers to do that are going to increase the likelihood that we can keep the things that we already have that we love? Last thing I want to just talk about is mindset. This is not about Beacon, but this is really about our region. And I'll just go off script for a minute. We did a study last year called Old Malls, New Uses. And this focused on the fact that in this region, we have about 3.1 million square feet of dead shopping malls that are sitting on 2,100 acres of land. And we looked all over the country at other places that are adaptively reusing dead shopping malls and doing interesting adaptive reuse projects with them. And invariably, many of these projects take the same form. And that form is something called a 20-minute community, where they either tear down the mall or they tear down sort of the bones of the mall and leave the anchor stores in sight as anchor stores standing as pad sites. And in place of the mall, they build what in New York we would call a hamlet. It's sort of a new community from the ground up with lots of housing, always lots of housing, business space, commercial space, restaurant space, entertainment space, maybe a branch of the local library, a health center, and always a park, either a central park or a trail. And the idea behind these 20-minute communities is that within a 20-minute walk, you should be able to get from where you live to at least where you hang out, where you shop for groceries, where you exercise, and maybe even where you work, okay? And we found that this is happening in Nevada and Arizona and Colorado and Oregon and Michigan and all these places, especially west of the Mississippi. And I just want to tell you a brief story out of Arizona. When we interviewed the engineers behind one of these projects in Arizona, they explained that, they came to a meeting like this before a land use board or a town board, and they shared the proposal and had all the things I told you about, and it had 1,600 units of housing. And they came back the next month to that land use board, and the land use board said, hey, we were thinking about it. What can we do to turn 1,600 units of housing into 2,000? Now, after I fell out of my chair, I got up and I asked them to repeat the story, and I heard it right. And we heard the same story again in Nevada and Oregon and all these places, this same story of asking for more stuff, not less. And my staff and I kind of looked at each other puzzled, and what we really began to understand is that, it's all about mindset. In these places west of the Mississippi, and they're not always all doing it right, but many of them are. They're in this growth and vibrancy mindset. They're really in this growth and vibrancy mindset, and they're thinking about affordability and availability and, how to make communities walkable and vibrant. Growth and vibrancy mindset. And we got to thinking, well, how would we categorize our mindset here in the Hudson Valley? And for the past 25 years, our mindset has been more, how do we shut it down, slow it down, or cut it in half? Right? That's what it's been across the Hudson Valley. How do we shut it down, slow it down, or cut it in half? And we do see the consequences of that across the region there's 48,000 fewer kids in our public schools now than 20 years ago. Youth populations are down somewhere between 20 and 30% in just about every county. Our workforce regionally is getting ready to shrink by about 125,000 people in the next 10 to 15 years. And so when we're making decisions on the local level, it's important to really reflect on what do we need to support local businesses, not only vis-a-vis a workforce, but a customer base? What do we need to do to support local schools to make sure we're not seeing continued enrollment shrinkage that yields us having to close more school buildings? We've closed 53 school buildings in 20 years across the 9 counties. So just another bit of food for thought. Again, not about this situation you have in Beacon and this decision you have in Beacon, just a general thought on some of the metrics we're seeing around the Hudson Valley and the kind of mindset that others are putting into their projects that are resulting in smart growth, stable population numbers, stable workforce, stable youth populations, and frankly, some of these places are stealing our folks, right, who are choosing to move there. So wanted to share that. Happy to answer questions. Again, I think it's great that you have this mechanism in your zoning. It allows you to have some flexibility over what happens in that part of the city along the creek and on those parcels, and happy to answer any questions that you think might help.
Thank you, Adam, so much. Again, we really appreciate the perspective you can bring. I'll just offer up any questions to council you've got.
So I'm not sure if I'm following you correctly. Are you saying when it says to keep what we have, does that mean if there's future development along the creek that you would encourage more housing or less mixed use? So
what I would say to you is think hard about including more housing. Because I think if you look at your data, if you look at your linear feed of downtown retail, which even if it's not Main Street by name, if you do mixed use down there, you're just extending your Main Street. You're just extending your bottom floor retail environment, right? And what I'm trying to show you is already you have about double what a city your size has. And anything more that you build beyond that may just begin to cannibalize the space you already have instead of adding to the vibrancy, right?
What if it's not necessarily retail, but it's commercial? Say something that wouldn't necessarily apply on that Main Street corridor.
Give me an example of what you have in mind,
artist studios.
Yeah, I mean,
workspaces like that?
Sure. So artist studios that are, maybe co-located with housing, would be fine. Again, you got to sort of see what the market will capitalize.
Even office spaces of any sort?
Yeah, office space, right? Not a use that's in high demand. We've seen the number of people working from home triple in 7 years. So office space is really not in high demand. You have now 1 out of every 7 people in Dutchess, Columbia, and Ulster County working from home as their primary work location. So office space is not something, I can tell you that, not something I would encourage you to require. If someone thinks they have a market for a co-working space, let's say, because those people working from home, like me, need to get out of their house before they pull their hair out and do laundry every day, cool. But it's not something I would require.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, for sure. No problem. Molly, I saw you reaching for the mic before.
Yeah, can you say a little bit more about the big 4 of funding? You said brownfield sites, historical funding, and what was the third one?
Yeah, so the 4 big sources of funding, and this isn't just for housing developers, Molly, this is for developers in general, that they're needing to get at least 2 of to capitalize most projects is brownfield tax credits, historic tax credits, if it's housing, low-income housing tax credits, or a similar program, because the state, out of HCR, has really diversified the number and type of programs it has to try to provide incentives to housing development. And the 4th one was an ESD fund of some kind. It might be an ESD capital grant, or there's other grants through ESD. And Molly, just to put a little detail to that, we are now seeing some developers who are preferentially seeking out designated brownfields to develop, not only because it's great that we can clean the environment while we're also redeveloping sites that were home to something already anyway, but those credits are really making the difference between whether they can complete their capital stack or not. So at Pattern, we're doing, I was telling Chris this earlier, we're doing brownfield studies right now in Kingston and in Middletown. We expect to be doing ones next year in Port Jervis and Liberty. And the state's program doesn't focus it still focuses on areas where there is known or suspected contamination. But that almost plays second fiddle now to their primary desire, which is to concentrate on areas of chronic vacancy and abandonness. So vacant and abandoned old factory buildings, or vacant and abandoned parcels, or parking lots that aren't utilized anymore. We've had a few of those come through the brownfield program. And the idea there is, once again, concentrate development where we have water and sewer in our downtowns, concentrate development in areas that are walkable, and concentrate development on parcels where there was already something built in the past where we could combine environmental cleanup for better environmental quality in the community and providing that community with something it knows that it wants and needs based on public policy or public input, and make the best of both worlds there.
The other thing I would add, because you may not know the city as well as what we're thinking about up here, there's another area, Route 52, heads from our downtown over to Fishkill.
Yeah, that's where I bought my first car, from the Hyundai.
Exactly.
When the Hyundai was over there, and it was he's not alive anymore, but it was a former police chief, I think, in Beacon, was a salesman there.
That may well be.
bought
So
my
it's
first car
moving
from me.
from being car dealerships, and we're starting to go through a rezoning. We have a report we're going to start reviewing shortly. And we're also thinking that might be an area where we can get mixed-use commercial retail, which is just, in your words, would be lengthening our Main Street, basically.
Well, consider there's a lot of downtown revitalization happening across the region, right? Right now, there are probably about 22,000 units of housing in the development pipeline across the 9 counties. You have about 5,000 here in Dutchess, about 3,000 in Ulster. You've got about 12 to 15,000 in Westchester. There's a lot of housing in the development pipeline. Some of that housing will not cross the finish line because of persisting capital gaps will be the number one thing that quote unquote kills some of those projects. But there will be other reasons for some of them as well. The communities that are having the most success, Lee, are the ones that are going to a form-based code and caring a little bit more about what the form and shape and look and size of the buildings are, and a little less about what the heck goes in them, right? So that's what, not saying New Rochelle is an analog, but that's what set New Rochelle off on its path. That's what set Port Chester off on its path. The reason Kingston is getting so much development interest now is not only due to its form-based code, but largely due to its form-based code, where they're now actually allowing housing to be sited on the empty parcels within its industrial park, its manufacturing park that it has in the city to, once again, co-locate uses. So those communities that have gone to a form-based code, thinking about what does a building look like, what are the heights, what are the materials, what are the aesthetics of the building, and caring less about what goes in it, are seeing a lot of success. I had another thought on that, but I forgot it. If it comes back to me, I'll share it.
So I just want to make sure people are aware. Natalie Quinn, our planner, is also on the call, remote.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, hey, Natalie.
Hey, Natalie, and Natalie certainly knows this. Natalie's doing a lot of work with in community. Natalie's doing a lot of work in different communities, but I know has also done work with developers who are building in places that have form-based codes. So, that also speeds up the land use review times. Quite often, I think some projects in Kingston are going from application to approval in under 2 months now. Lots going on.
We're also considering significant changes down by our waterfront in the near future. And would this apply, in terms of, already having a double the amount of linear feet of retail space? Would development down by the riverfront negatively impact what we already have? Or?
Well, listen, it's really hard to say, because there you have a little bit of a different environment. You have a lot of non-city residents coming in to use the train who may become customers of that environment if there's business down there, who otherwise might not make their way up Main Street. That might even been like me when I was going to college and hopping the train 3 days a week to get my master's degree. You'll have some people living down there who might want what you would consider like neighborhood retail, like a coffee shop or something that they might not make their way up the hill for, but if it's down there, they'll patronize it. So it's going to be a little bit of a different environment, and I don't think that necessarily pulls away from your Main Street, and I also don't think the people who live down there just on a whim on a morning or on an evening will necessarily come up to Main Street and go that far down Main Street for things, right? So you'll have different environments that have different drivers based on transportation assets, destinations, housing density, co-location of businesses with housing. I hope that answers your question, but I think that might be a little bit of a different environment.
Yeah, no, just that this came before us about 15 years ago to develop the riverfront.
Yeah.
And we were very concerned about our
Yeah.
Main Street that was just beginning to see a renaissance.
Absolutely.
And so we discouraged the development at the waterfront
Right.
to allow our Main Street to catch up to the interest that Beacon was
Yeah.
drawing. So there's going to be some concern, I'm sure, as the plans develop and
Yeah.
become public, about its impact on Main Street. And
Yeah,
I think-
momentum in downtown retail environments, especially nowadays in the digital retail age, is kind of a fickle thing, right? So I think you're right to just be asking the question, and I think you're right that as those developments proceed and as you figure out what's going to happen over by the creek, that you just keep a careful eye on absorption rate, vacancies, all that sort of stuff. I think it's a valid question, but you won't know too much until you see sort of how the market and what your customer base ends up being whenever something's.
But that changes often. I mean, we have a developer along the Fishkill Creek that's saying there's no opportunity for no commercial interests are expressing interest in his property, and he's bound by the current zoning to provide that. And
Yeah.
he wants out of that requirement.
Yeah.
So that could change, in 2 months, in 2 years, I don't know.
That's pretty far away from your core. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're getting it, to use a chemistry term, you're getting into the electron cloud and pretty far away from the nucleus when you get back there.
Okay.
So again, I'm not telling you to do it or not to do it, but I think you do just need to consider the current bottom floor downtown retail environment, whether you just be cannibalizing what you have by adding to it, and sort of strategically, is it better to just build up potentially a slightly bigger sort of native full-time connected to downtown customer base by allowing something different back there. Again, that's something you can definitely consult with Natalie. Natalie Natalie knows everything that I'm telling you now to be true across the region, and make a decision based on the best information that people like she and I are giving you.
And for the council's benefit, the code language is in 223-41.14B, which in the Fishkill Creek zone, there's a requirement for non-commercial space, and in this project, they have not yet built out building 100, they've built out buildings 200 and 300 with the residential, and they've come to the council demonstrating to their belief that they have fairly marketed the property for non-commercial and cannot do so. So they've asked the council to apply the language that reads, less non-residential square footage may be granted by the city council for the voluntary and guaranteed inclusion in the project of desirable environmental, transportation, or other substantial public benefits which would not otherwise be required of the project as determined in the sole discretion of the city council. So the question before the council on that project is, do you believe they've taken the appropriate steps to try to market the property, and having not been able to do so, and they've told you they can't build the non-commercial, do you wish to now allow residential instead of commercial? So that's the question that is before the council for the next steps, once you believe you have sufficient information to have that discussion.
I mean, I guess with that, one question I'd like to ask you, Adam, is in your thinking, if for the Fishkill Creek development, if you are going to have residential and commercial requirement, should there be, and I guess it goes along not necessarily with what you said before with the form-based code, but should we be more specific that, unless they had a particular commercial business ready to go into one building, would it be better to require retail and commercial space on the ground floors and have the residential above?
Yeah, again, I think based on what you already have in the city, I think it's going to, and also you got to remember you're also affected by what surrounds you, right? So based on what you have in the city and based on what you have up and down the highway corridor that sort of runs alongside your city, I just think it's going to be really hard to capitalize that kind of development, to have steady tenancy, and to do all those things without cannibalizing what you already have. I just think it's going to be difficult based on what we know. Listen, without disclosure, I talked to 2 bank presidents over the weekend, just trying to wrap my mind around some of the things we're seeing in lending across the region. And they essentially said to me outright, they're not capitalizing, they're not lending to anything that's less than 90% housing. And even then, some of them are already over leveraged on commercial stuff that's non-housing commercial stuff, right? Because technically anything more than 4 units is considered commercial even in the housing world. But they're already over leveraged in some cases, and they've been forced by the regulators to package up some of that commercial debt and sell it off. So I think it's both a function of the downtown environment, the retail environment, the lending environment, the environment that surrounds you with different kinds of retail that's both walkable and drivable, that it's really, really difficult to add more volume into a market where there's already sufficient vacancy that if someone has a commercial or retail enterprise, they can go around and find a spot. That's just my sense of it from being around the region and working in a lot of downtowns.
And with the 22,000 units that are in the housing pipeline within the area, do you think residential is going to get oversaturated?
No. So I don't have the data for Dutchess, but I have it for Ulster and Westchester. So let me just share this with you. There are a bunch of drivers of housing demand that people don't understand well. But you can kind of simplify it into fitting into 2 buckets right now, okay? None of those buckets is population growth. We are not growing, okay? The regional population has been 2.4 million people essentially for 30 years, okay? There is a lot of housing being taken out of circulation, for lack of a better phrase, by second homes, short-term rentals, Dilapidation. Some of our counties are actually losing a lot of housing stock to dilapidation because we have pretty old stock. Corporate and investor purchases of housing. And then the funky one is work from home, because it doesn't take it off the stock. Work from home is a little bit of two sides of the same coin, because people who might live in Beacon and work from home are still living and shopping here, but those housing units are not available to people who would also work here in a local business, in City Hall, wherever that job might be, right? So work from home is a little bit of a funky situation compared to the others. Those are taking housing stock out of circulation, so to speak, for local people who both live here and work here. Some communities in the Southern Catskills that are part of our patterns territory have as much as 35% of their housing in short-term rentals. That's a lot. So like 1 out of every 3 homes that were available 15 years ago just are not anymore, right? But the bigger driver, and follow me here, the bigger driver of housing demand in the region right now is the shrinking size of the average family. So let's say the population of Beacon 20 years ago was 100 people, and all those people lived in families of 5. You would need 20 homes, right? 20 times 5 is 100. Now, 20 years later, let's say you still have exactly 100 people living in Beacon, but all those households have shrunk to households of 4. Now you need 25 housing units. So you just increased your housing demand by 5 units without your population even moving an inch. That is the biggest driver of demand for housing in the region right now, because that is happening on a massive regional scale. If you go back just 10 or 15 years ago, most average households were right around 3 people. Now we're hanging out around 2.6, 2.7, depending on where you are. That change alone in Westchester County, just the shrinking size of the family, forget population, forget all that other stuff, drives the demand for more than 12,000 additional homes in Westchester County. In Ulster County, it's 3,300. Again, I haven't looked at the data for Dutchess, but my guess is it's somewhere analogous to Ulster. Let's call it 4,000 probably, because you're a little bigger than Ulster. So that is a big, big driver of housing demand, that if we even want to stand a chance of keeping our population steady, we need to build a lot more housing. And so that'll provide not only the workforce that our local businesses are struggling to find, and that struggle, unfortunately, is going to get a little more difficult. But again, I keep harping on that year-round customer base, right? Things are great this time of year, right? A lot of leaf peepers coming up, a lot of folks coming up on the train to hike Breakneck, hike Mount Beacon, right? Go to Dia, do different things around the region. But hey, who's going to be there for you in February, right? When I worked at the local weekly paper, when I first got out of college, we used to put out a guide to local government in February just to get more advertising dollars. Even though we knew village elections were in March, and within a month the guide wouldn't be accurate anymore. February's tough. February's tough. So, that's what I always keep in mind. The drivers of housing demand, full-time workforce, full-time customer base. Those are the, I said today down in White Plains, this region, the trajectory of this region is going to be determined by 2 words that start with the letter H: housing and humans, and do we have enough of both? That's what we're looking at now, because right now all the data show us we're in for a period of workforce and full-time population shrinkage, and certainly we're seeing the youth shrinkage already.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that the Beacon, with its renewed popularity, is also attracting people from New York City to the south, right?
Yep.
And so not only are we shrinking our household size, but we're also attracting new people who want to be here, and we're short further in terms of housing. Yep.
Yeah, and you guys know, I don't have to tell you, I've looked at all the school data. I think Beacon City schools are down like 1,100 kids in the past decade or something like that. So, we were at 49 school buildings closed as of last year. This year, another 4 closed, so we're up to 53. And, hey, that's sign of the times, but painful stuff. We just closed one in my school district, and it's not fun. That's where a lot of people had their first dance, their first time voting in an election, right? All those memories, and it's at the center of our community. So that stuff is hard. So you make decisions with all that stuff in mind: retail density, what you can sustain, the dire need for housing, the way that housing might help you preserve the things you love and want in your community. And if there's anything else I can do to help, I'm only a phone call away.
Great.
Okay?
I just had one little.
Sure.
You mentioned short-term rentals.
Yeah.
What have you seen, has that like impacted in the sense of even, the schools, the students are less, and, what kind of
Yeah.
impact are you seeing on cities and who's done it well? And-
Great news. We just won, Pattern won a national grant competition through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. There were 1,900 applicants, only 30 winners were picked nationwide, and we were one of them. We are right now working on the first ever study anywhere in New York of what's called corporate home ownership. This is where investor organizations and large corporations come into a region and start buying up a lot of single-family and two-family homes and turning those homes either into long-term rentals, in other words, just renting them back to people who live there, or short-term rentals. We have just done the first sort of fact-checking on the data. This is very, very data-intensive and hard to collect because it probably comes as no surprise to you. A lot of these corporations own each individual parcel under a different LLC. So the hardest thing for us to do is actually, if you think of those LLCs like branches on a tree, the most difficult thing is to trace all those branches back to their common corporate trunk so you can see who the common owners are across a region like ours. But we figured out a way to do it with some data partners, and we just got a first look at the data the other day. We're going to be sharing them for the first time at our housing conference on October 14th at SUNY New Paltz. And it also comprises the first comprehensive map of all short-term rentals in Orange, Ulster, Dutchess, Sullivan, Columbia, and Greene counties. So this is going to be of great interest to the region because not only are you going to be able to see your total quantity and proportion of short-term rentals, but you'll be able to see the density of them, right? So I mentioned that one community up in the Catskills that has about 35% of its housing in short-term rental. We've done some things with mapping to show sort of where the hotspots are, and not only the total number, but the proportionality of it too. So that'll be out sometime around the end of the year, and hopefully it'll answer some of those questions that you have about where they are and how many and all that.
Thank you.
Okay? Yep, you bet.
All right, everyone?
Yeah.
Adam, we really appreciate your
You
time.
bet.
It's a
Absolutely.
wealth of information. Well, you've done so well, we'll probably call on you again for advice, or at least data.
Okay. Hey, I hope you all enjoy a great autumn with your families, and
Yeah.
call me anytime, okay?
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Adam. I just want to say that I do have quite a few questions left, but I'm happy to follow up via email if the mayor could put us in touch, please. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah,
I'm
that'd be
easily
fine.
found by email and happy to get on the phone with you as well.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Anything else on this topic, or are we ready to go on to the train station thoughts, right? So I'd just like to introduce this. This is just what we call the Waterfront Development District currently, and Nick and Natalie are going to take us through a proposal to make some, actually in the end, modest changes, but with a lot of wording changes.
That's correct. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So, as the Mayor said, this is a change to the WD district, the existing WD district, and the zoning changes are text changes and also a proposed map change, and this is in connection with property around the train station where the city can adopt and apply its zoning district, but under state law there are certain exemptions, like the under public authorities law, MTA property is exempt from that zoning, but individuals or projects can, as in the case of for proposed development, can voluntarily submit themselves to the zoning, which is what they've indicated they'll be doing, but it's not mandatory on the state authority or those that it contracts with. So what we've done is we've decided to take a look at the district and provided some updating. And the way zoning works is, right, you have districts that are zoned, and then the text determines what uses are permitted, and then it has dimensional regulations as to the dimensions that are required in that district. And then the text itself is your roadmap to what permits are required, how are they processed, what are the requirements, the design guidelines that a project needs to meet. And the WD district, the waterfront zone, so the city's waterfront zones is the WP and the WD districts, the waterfront park and the waterfront development. Those were adopted in 1991. and have not really been touched since then in any substantial way. There were some changes made to food trucks, but other than that, the district has not been examined. And when Natalie and I looked at this, we said it's a time to make it reflect the city's view on the processing of the permits, and also update it in some respects with the code language. One of the first things we looked at was, and Ben, if we can put up the zoning map for a moment, the location of the WD. There are two WD zoning districts, and they're both on the east side of the train tracks. And the WD district, you'll see in a moment, or if you're following at home, you have it. And Ben, if we can zoom in, there we go, thank you. The WD district is not on the waterfront. It is by the train station. It's on the west side of the tracks, and it's two districts, one to the north of where it says LI, and one to the south.
East side of the tracks.
Sorry, east side of the tracks. I
Right,
said
away
west.
from the Hudson, right?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah.
I was always told go west.
Yeah.
So,
The other east, the other west.
yes. So we have proposed to retitle the district the train station district, just so that it more truly reflects the district's intent and where it's geographically located. The waterfront park district would remain. So Ben, we can take this one down, and we can then go to the schedule of dimensional regulations. So the zoning code will change the WD to the TS, the train station district. With respect to the dimensional regulations, the one change we made, and Ben, if you can just zoom in a little bit to the bottom, is we of course updated the nomenclature so it no longer says WD, it says TS, train station, but we reduced the acreage. The thought behind the waterfront park zoning and also the train station zoning is that you have some larger parcels, but it's not all going to be developed at once. It's going to be developed in assemblages of parcels. And so it's currently a 5-acre zoning. The thought was to make the minimum lot size 3 acres. Someone can come in with larger acres, but there is a minimum 3 acres. So this zoning proposes to change that minimum lot size from 3 to 5 acres. And that's the only change in the dimensional regulations.
From
Ben,
5 to 3.
5 to 3.
Yep.
Nick,
Still
could
my-
you just clarify?
Thank you.
There's two areas that are waterfront district currently, and then there's an LI between them. Are we
Yes.
changing the LI as well?
No, the LI is
LI
remaining.
remains, okay.
Correct. Yes. We decided to go with some surgical precision here and not focus everything, because then it would become more cumbersome. So we figured, let's just go with the existing WD districts, change it to TS, and keep the LI as the LI.
And again, this doesn't touch anything on the riverside of the tracks. And that was one of the reasons for the nomenclature change, is that people were confusing that the transit-oriented development would be a long dock. People actually asked that question online. And really what we think of as the waterfront is the waterfront park. So we thought changing the name was also valuable, because then you know it's on the train property, not on the waterfront.
And do I have a false memory of having addressed some of the zoning down there a number of years ago, where we talked about elevations and so on and view sheds?
Yeah, that was incorporated into the 2017 comprehensive plan. And in fact, the summary of the 2017 showed, here's what's different from the 07. And the map says, yeah, we actually worked on the WD zoning to impose height limits and other things in that. And they're different based on the north lot versus the south lot.
Right, so we have changed zoning since 1991, have we not?
Well, the comprehensive plan looked at it, but there wasn't any substantive change to the district itself. The attachment 4, I believe, came out of that.
Was that not adopted, or? The attachment 4 is the one that shows the height differences and
Correct,
everything
yes.
else. Somehow, I think we adopted that, but now you're making me wonder.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
I'll go
how
back
that's
and-
how I remember it, but I could be wrong as
Yeah.
well, yeah.
And Ben, if we can put the schedule of uses up next, before we get into the text of the change in the schedule of uses, we again changed WD to TS. And in looking at this with Natalie, we looked at what uses are currently permitted, if that's appropriate. We felt those that are permitted, represented by the P, remain appropriate in the train station district and development. And we looked at those that are an X, that are prohibited. And there were two that caught our attention that are currently prohibited, that we thought it made sense to change to permitted. The first one was an artist studio, art gallery, or exhibit space. That could be changed to a permitted use in the train station district. You'll see that on the first page, about 8 columns down. In the column under TS, you'll see it change from an X to a P in blue. And then the second one is on the second page of the schedule of uses, again, and towards the bottom. You'll see that we put down as a permitted accessory use a home occupation or artist studio, which is consistent in other residential districts.
Just jump in here, Nick. I think one of the minor changes, obviously, as you can see, to the permitted uses or accessory uses in the district. And I think the reason for allowing this is there is within 400 feet of the train station, kind of this goes back to Adam's conversation that you all just had. There is a requirement for within 400 feet of the train station that 25% of the total development of the total proposed development should be non-residential. So I think in thinking about that, we wanted to make sure there was as much flexibility as was appropriate in terms of, you know, types of commercial uses. If we're going to require that the portion of a building be non-residential in this difficult market where it is sometimes difficult to find commercial tenants, we wanted these non-residential uses, potentially non-residential uses of art gallery and exhibit space to at least be allowed to occupy that required 25%.
The TOD does not propose 25% commercial.
It is a requirement within 400 feet of the train station. So the MTA TOD development may not, but there is a requirement in the code that development within 400 feet. So just thinking about the WD potentially TS district in the future, I think that was the idea of allowing more flexibility there throughout the district, not just the MTA TOD site.
And Ben, we can take these documents down, and we're now just going to turn to the text itself, which is the local law that is in the council agenda packet. The procedure, the steps would be, if you're comfortable with these changes, would be at your voting meeting on Monday would be to introduce the local law and refer it to the county and the city planning boards for review and comment, and then hold a public hearing. I'm going to walk through the changes by pages, and Natalie, please jump in and join me and interrupt me or correct me as it may be appropriate. And a lot of them you'll see are wordsmithing and cleaning up of the language. So on the first page, we're changing WD to TS train station. Article 4A, we're retitling waterfront and train station area. On the second page, again, some more wordsmithing. We've sort of added the introductory paragraph as talking about the purpose of the district, and we've modified some of that language. On section B, permitted principal uses, you'll see, and it continues on to pages 3 and 4, we deleted a lot of language. That's because in the intervening time since your zoning code was amended, you've taken out the listing of permitted uses and you've gone to a chart that we've painstakingly simplified. And so there's no reason to list it twice.
Yeah.
So that's why those pages are deleted, as well as with section C on page 3, permitted accessory use. In paragraph E on page 4, and this also continues on to several pages, it set forth what was the procedure. And it had a concept plan review, there was a special permit, there was a site plan. That's not how this council has viewed land use projects proceeding. You've delegated a lot to the planning board. Council has determined its role is in setting the legislation as to the view of how projects should be developed. The planning board then gets in the design and the site layout of it. And there's no reason to have an applicant do a concept plan, a special permit, and a site plan. So it's just reduced to a site plan, and the planning board retains the authority to adjust and modify the designs, and that's why I think the most important part of this project, discussion of the local law, is the design guidelines.
And there was also just a lot of redundancy in this section, and pages 7, 8 as it continues going, where what is state law with regards to seeker was either restated, or in some ways state law was actually contradicted by the language in the code. So I think in terms of the changes that Nick's kind of walking us through is, if something is already addressed, in the permitted use table, or in, state requirements for seeker review, it doesn't need to be restated in this section of the code. I think, the waterfront section of the code was quite long compared to any other sections, even newer sections like the LI district or the CMS. So where language was redundant with other places, it was stricken.
Thank you. And new section D on page 8 is starting the whole process of site plan review. And a little disclosure, it's the chapter for site plan is actually site development plan review. At various places in the code, it either says site plan review or site development plan. Everyone commonly refers to it as site plan review. We also get charged by E-codes with the words that you change, so we figured let's just go with a simpler site plan review, a chapter of site development plan. Everyone will know what we mean. So that's, you may see some, if you see any inconsistencies, please let us know, but the goal is to just call it site plan review. Again, a lot of this is procedural, and the planning board will review it, and Natalie's reviewed it in terms of the intake of the site plan application, which is really what pages 9 and 10 talk about. It's really on page 11, paragraph E, where we talk about development standards and architectural design standards. And Natalie, I don't know if you have any comments or you want to walk us through these pages?
No, I would say that the development standards and the design standards have largely been left intact. I think where we added language was where, as we were going through, it wasn't quite, the language could be interpreted in other ways, and it maybe required some kind of clarification or a little bit more flexibility. So you'll see there's not a lot of changes besides, I think, going to TS or talking about the different areas. I think on page 12, subsection G was probably where the most language was added in terms of design standards. And it was specifically with regards to parking decks, and it had talked about preferably with a green screen. And I did my best to ask planners all over what exactly that meant, green screen, and we couldn't come up with a unified answer to that, and it wasn't defined in the code. So we added some language there to kind of talk about what we believe green screening was meant at, and it's basically trying to visibly screen or improve the aesthetics of parking structures. So I think that's actually where the most language was added.
Yeah, I can
Page
appreciate
13.
the addition of that language, Natalie, as we might end up with a large structure with a large, very public wall. So taking time with that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And then, similarly, you can see on page 13 where there's certain things talking about kind of ground floor entrance doors. And again, we added, knowing that there's likely going to be a parking structure component, added language on that so that it was going to be more clear, upon your guys' review and approval of this local law, will be more clear for the planning board which portion of buildings these design standards apply to. And then just going down, I think, scrolling down to 15, you'll see we continue to make changes where, we add parking structures into consideration for vehicular circulation systems, changing again WD to TS. And then I think one of the last sections where there is an addition is page 16, 12F. Because there was so much language in the amendments to, with the comprehensive plan in 2007, 2017, kind of consideration of heights and varying heights. We wanted to make sure that roof structures and equipment on roofs were taken into consideration when thinking about the heights of buildings. Sometimes those aspects can be afterthoughts in terms of how they look on a building and how far they protrude. So I think we added additional language for the review of those rooftop equipment, structures and equipment.
And then the last change, thank you, Natalie, is on page 18, where we took existing language from the WD district and brought it into the code, and that's titled Adjustment or Amendment to Site Plan. So it's legalizing or formalizing something that's already in the code, but moving and making it apply to all districts. And also it's a practice that occurs anyway that's commonly referred to as a field change. So project gets site plan approval, and then when you're out in the field, due to a technical issue, maybe you hit rock, maybe you have to then move a location of a building a foot, or put a fence different, or put your parking entrance differently, or when you go to get your DOT permit, it's in a different location. This gives the authority to the building inspector to make those minor amendments and to refer to the planning board for those more substantial amendments.
Sorry, Nick, you were saying those two sections apply to all zones or just to this zone?
No, it would be all zones.
All zones.
Yep, and that's why we've taken it out of the WP and put it in the site development plan approval, so it would then apply to all zones. And this local law will go to the, we have reviewed it with we've reviewed some of it with the building inspector yet, but not all of it. I wanted to get your thoughts first, and then it will be reviewed by the planning board, and we'll get their comments on that as well.
Okay, so I know there's a lot there, but if I were to summarize the substantive changes, the minimum lot size is reduced from 5 acres to 3.
Correct?
And at the time this was written, Metro North may have had just one big lot. We don't know. The second thing was the non-residential percentage was reduced. Is that correct? And I think that was referring to the southern lot as opposed to the northern lot.
Yes.
And that's because of the distance, right? But I think this just makes it a little bit more flexible. Then the third change was adding artist live work as a use, a permitted use. And then there's a bunch of languages either redundant and pulled out or updated or, applied to all of the zones. That's all the technical stuff that you and Natalie work on, which we appreciate. A little clarification on design standards, especially with respect to a garage. And I just need to make sure the last one, does this include picking up the north edge of, so if Ben, could you put up the map again?
Yeah, so fair enough. On page, one of the last page,
Yeah.
where the zoning map is being amended to reflect that a portion of a property is being taken from the WP to the TS district.
Yep. So if you look on this map, the train station lot is basically the tracks, but there's a little piece on the north side that extends to the east, and that's on the other side of the tracks. And so the idea is to make everything east of the tracks in the train station zone, and that would include a piece on the north where the parking keeps going past that red line. There's also a piece to the south. If you look to the south, the bridge determines the end of that WD lot, but actually the parking keeps going underneath the bridge and a little bit further. And so a piece of that would also come into the WD so that all of the train station lots to the east of the tracks, away from the river, would be in the train station zone, and everything to the west of the tracks would be in the park zone.
Yes.
Right?
That is correct.
Good, thank you.
That is a fair
On
summary.
one
Good.
clarification, if we can go back 1 point. So the commercial minimum has not been reduced. If you want to go to page 2, section B of the code. So commercial was never required on the northern WD parcel that is currently zoned that, right? The language that's in the code is that permitted principal uses shall be those listed in the use table, subject to the requirement that a minimum of 25% of the total development floor area within 400 feet of the train station shall be permitted non-residential uses. So the local law as it's currently proposed is not reducing that 25%. And again, that 25% only applies to a small area of the WD, soon to be TS, that is within 400 feet of the actual station. But what was changed in this local law is adding 2 potential commercial uses, right? In terms of the primary use of artists, trying to look at what of the uses of artist, studio, art gallery, and exhibit space could now be some of those non-residential uses. But as it stands, that number was not reduced, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
I just had a few things which I'm feeling like this, maybe some of the wording, some of my questions might have been already corrected because I was questioning whether we were looking at east or west sometimes on a couple of things. On E10, and 15. Let me get there. In A, I'm just wondering,
What page, Pam?
on page 15, 10A, the LWRP, I know like later on it says what it is, but if it could say what it is there, the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program, because I was like, what does that mean? But I see like several pages down, it does say it has it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, these two zones, the WP, the park zone, and the development zone, arose from the local waterfront revitalization plan that was put out in '91, right?
And then also in E3, I wasn't sure, like when it said, no building in the TS South area shall be taller than 32 feet above grade at the curb line of Beekman Street. Where? Is it just like wherever you are? Like, I just wasn't sure what that meant. And I felt like that was said again later on the maximum heights with a little different wording. It had the word average in it. That would, but I don't have where that was.
We can certainly look at that and make it clarified, and clarify it.
We can look, I think that's where attachment 4 may come in as like an illustrative example, because it gives those kind of general sight lines that it's looking at. But I agree with Nick that we all know I wasn't around when that section was drafted, but I think we can look at that to see if that was determined or clarified by attachment 4.
Okay, yeah, because I can find where it was talking about the maximum height on page 17, which it was worded a little different. It was saying, now I lost it again. 32, height may not exceed average of 32 feet at Beekman Street, nor more than the average of 70 feet above the average ground level of the existing Metro North parking.
We can look at that. I mean, I do see that it says above grade and above average ground level, so we can double check descriptions of those and definitions of those to make sure. Commonly they mean the same thing, but I think it's a good point to make sure that that translates with the code's definitions and language.
Okay.
Right, and that language is applying to the southern train station lot, not the northern one, because it refers to the area south of the LI, right? Yeah. Because the heights are different depending on if it's the lot adjacent to the platform or the north lot, right?
Yeah, I read this whole thing without looking at the map, so it was like north-south, and then when I looked, I'm like, oh, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, it took me a while. Other questions?
Yeah, just trying.
And the heights aren't changing, right?
Correct. Correct, the heights remaining the same.
One thing, I don't know if you're going to also draft what we're going to send to the planning board, if that's a standard thing, but I know from they've had other discussions to do, not with obviously this district, but with the linkage in the transitional districts where they've made comment that they feel like the design standards aren't as tight, so I appreciate this is written. And a lot of this, is existing, and so I'm curious in particular if at this moment, if we have a moment of approving and adjusting this, if there's anything else with the design standards that they would want us to look at or adjust, rather than a project coming before them and they're like, oh, our hands are tired because this is in the code. And it's like, okay, well, here is the moment for you to suggest other things that as architectural professionals you might suggest.
So when we send it to them, we can draft, as we've done, as you mentioned, some in the past, some sort of a cover memo that gives them some direction, request for feedback, and sort of call out a specific area to look at if that's what the council would like.
Yeah, I agree. I actually was thinking that also, especially, listening to some of their discussions, especially when it says, may require. Well, is that, could it be more tightened up on their end that it's giving them too much they're not sure where to take it and what is kind of expected of them.
I think the planning board has been having that conversation. I think, it's a fine line. You're trying to allow flexibility for innovative design, and kind of the expression of architecture while still giving guidance. So I think it's a fair question to put to the planning board. But I think that's why, you'll see some of these things where it should, shall, or may, kind of depending on what is a priority that you want to require of all buildings, and where is it worth having a body that has discretion to look at that unique site, that unique space, that development, and what it requires. So there is reason for the flexibility in the language and the level of discretion, but I think it has been a topic of conversation with the planning board, so it's worth reviewing.
Yeah, and to build on that, I'm generally in fine of streamlining our sort of approval process, particularly when it comes to things like concept plan approvals. To me, basically, the concept plan should be your zoning, what your zoning is, particularly in a zoning that's so specific like this. And so therefore, that's our responsibility to take care of that, and we want to give the planning board tools if their main thing is going to be a site plan approval, so that they can then actualize that in a way that actually meets the vision that we think we're aiming for collectively in our community.
Yep. Well, let's see what they say, but I also think, when this was drafted, the heights were very specifically thought through. The design standards are more general because you can't really determine exactly what it's going to look like. The idea that Molly suggested of, well, if there's going to be a garage, we might want to look carefully at that one. But again, it has to remain pretty general, while still trying to specify what you're looking for design. So let's see what they have to say. Anything else? What's our next step on this?
Our next step is that your meeting on Monday would be to introduce the local law and refer it to the city and county planning board for a report and recommendation.
Okay.
And we'll make revisions to this law as discussed at tonight's meeting.
Okay. Everybody good? Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, we have some appointments. The first one is the appointment of Glenn Williams to a water and sewer maintenance helper position. Chris, you're going to tell us about Glenn?
Yes, we just filled a position that was exactly like this with Brandon Travis, who you remember. In the course of our interviews, we found a very good second candidate. And we didn't have a helper position open, but we had a maintenance mechanic position that we haven't filled. So what we're proposing to do is hire this other person that we thought the world of, who we think we can grow into that position. And that's Glenn Williams from Wappingers Falls. He would be appointed to water and sewer maintenance helper. He has done work on HVAC installation, including excavation for gas lines and electric conduit. He has a CDL and would be able to drive our vac truck and our sewer clean out. And he is someone that we really went back and forth with on this decision. So when we see someone with that kind of potential, we thought we can grow him into the other job. So we'd like to appoint him because we have not been able to fill the other position. We just can't find the right combination of skills, and we think that he has great promise to take that position, but we want to have him work his way up.
Great. Everyone good?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next two are the Board of Assessment Review. So we have one renewal, that's Michelle Rios, and we have one new one, that's David Ross. You want to tell us a little bit about both, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely, Mayor. Thank you. As you indicated, we're looking at two vacancies on the Board of Assessment Review right now. The reason why we're bringing this to the council now, as opposed to the beginning of the year when we discuss most of our renewals on various committees, is because they have a little bit of a different term schedule. Their terms run through October, I believe, or the end of September, Nick, is that correct?
Yes, the end of
Correct,
September.
end of September.
Yes.
Starts
So
October 1st.
that's why it's timely now to get these positions filled, even though the bulk of their work won't be taking place until the spring. Michelle has served 2 terms already. This would be her 3rd, which means she's been on the Board of Assessment Review for about 10 years. I believe she was first appointed in 2014. She is a long real estate career as a licensed real estate agent and a broker for over 20 years or thereabouts. So she has a great background for this board. David has a distinguished career in fine arts management. He's worked throughout the country in an executive administrative roles with various art institutions. We think he's a very impressive candidate, and he's willing to spend the time on this board as well, and we're excited to bring his application to your attention as well.
All right, and then I would just add the Board of Assessment Review is one of the 3 statutory required ones, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board, and the Board of Assessment Review. Their job is mostly focused around May, when you have the new assessments come out and there's a grievance process, and they will hear grievances. That's the non-litigation process that the city does. And then if it ever goes past that, it goes past it. But their job is primarily in that month of May, and I'm just appreciative that we've got people willing to do it. So,
And I would just add that we did talk to our assessor, Kathy Martin, about Michelle, and she was happy to have her come back as well. And obviously that's an important relationship for them to work together.
everybody good? Yep. All right, so the next one is an intermunicipal agreement, that's what an IMA is, concerning public safety mutual aid. Nick, will you tell us what this is about?
I will, and this arises out of or in connection with a local law that the city adopted last December, because under New York State law, it is the chief executive officer, the mayor of a municipality, who has the authority to request mutual aid unless it's being delegated or authorized to a different officer within the municipal corporation. So Dutchess County wants to revise and also formalize and make some changes to the policies for mutual aid, which is when another jurisdiction, the sheriffs or other police departments request assistance from the county, or the county requests it from another jurisdiction. So the county has gone to all the municipalities in Dutchess and proposed this IMA. Before many of the municipalities, including Beacon, could enter into this IMA, they had to change the law to allow the police chief to request mutual aid because of response time and just for ease of administration. And so now that you've adopted the local law and the agreement has been negotiated among the many municipalities, it's now ready to be brought to you for consideration. So this will allow the police chief or the city to request mutual aid from the sheriff's office or each other when needed. And it sets forth the various ways that gets done, the policies. It also sets forth what is the purpose. On page 21 of your agenda packet, page 2 of the agreement, to formalize the relationship, to eliminate the need to follow formal procedures set forth in the general municipal law because you have a less formal procedure set forth in this agreement, provide for more efficient utilization of law enforcement. It then talks about the scope of the agreement, gives some examples, and we can opt out of the agreement at any point in time on notice. And the jurisdictions retain liability for their personnel when they respond to the scene. And additionally, when at the scene, they are under the jurisdiction of the officer unless there is a superior officer from the responding force there, then they follow the directions of their responding officer. So if Beacon were to send a patrol person, that patrol person would have to respond to the supervisor at the scene in the other community. If, however, there is a superior officer from Beacon there, they would be under the direction, still under the direction of the city. So the agreement is really to formalize how it's, quite frankly, working now to by and large, degree.
And we've used this in the past when we've had events and we haven't had enough people to cover. We've used it rarely, but we have used it. The police chief also retains full control of whether he releases a patrol officer or other officers. So if we're understaffed or we have something going on, he can say no. But it does formalize and it kind of sets ground rules on something we've been doing anyway that we have to do because there are events that no one is staffed up for. And we do this with our fire regularly, and it really helps all the small departments kind of support each other.
Okay. And you can imagine why I don't want to be in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Okay, and then the next one are the bids on the rooftop solar project. You're going to tell us about that, Chris?
Yes, but it's bid, singular. So back in 2023, we put into the capital program highway garage solar installation at the cost of $400,000, which is what we were estimating it would cost. It took a while for us to get this out because we were looking at design considerations. One of the concerns from our staff were that the lags that would be put in to hold these panels would puncture the new roof that was built in 2016, 2017. So our engineers actually came up with a clamp, found that there's a clamp system for the metal roof so that we really minimize those punctures to the roof. And we finally put it out to bid. We had one company answer, which is Renewa Energy from Clifton Park. They've done a lot of projects in the state. They also do EV charger station installations, and they've been working on the Thruway. They had really good references. So they initially put in a bid for $257,000 and change for a smaller service than we actually needed. And we put out an addendum that they had missed. Because they were the only bidder, and it's really a marginal amount, it's about 10% more, we allowed them to revise the bid, very transparently, to $288,808.90. And what that does is it will get us a solar PV installation on the garage that basically is fit to the use of the garage at 136,000 kilowatt hours per year. We think there's probably going to be more, so any excess would be remotely credited and net metered back to us. They would do this work. We're trying to have this done this year, so if you approve it next Monday, they'll have 75 days to do that. This again is another incremental step towards getting to 100% local solar. I'm very excited about working with this company, not only because they're a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, but because the breadth of what they do in terms of renewables, battery storage, I think are going to lead to other projects in the future. I think we can have them look at some other things while they're down here. So we're excited to finally get this off the planning shelf. I do want to say, out of the $288,000 cost, $125,000 is going to come back to us through a grant that was secured by Assembly Member Jonathan Jacobson. So we're excited to finally do this. Many of you know that last week we were recertified as a climate smart community at the silver level, which is the highest, and this just further builds on our commitment towards being one of the greenest communities in the valley.
Can I just ask, it's kind of off topic, but are they going to be able to enter that work area through the correction facility and not through Mattawan Road?
To be determined.
Okay.
Our crews are allowed through that,
Okay.
And it is open now in the morning and afternoon, so
I'm just
I
thinking
don't.
for simplicity of the schools, it probably would be wonderful if.
Yeah, I think we can arrange that. The correctional facility has been very good at working. We work very closely with them on a number of things, so I think that can be arranged.
I'm glad this is happening because I do remember when several of us approved the highway garage, and they aimed it so that it could have the solar panels.
This is the
wonderful.
perfect southeast-facing roof. It's just crying for solar
Yes.
panels.
It was designed.
But we also
for solar
needed to do it
panels.
in a way that really minimized the risk to that beautiful building that you built.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this project moving forward in a way that works, and that the extra bonus, as you mentioned, Chris, of having the opportunity to work with this company that does sound like there might be other projects that would align with our priorities too in the future.
We've got a few more roofs that I'd like them to look at while they're here.
And under budget. That's even better.
Yes.
Everybody good?
Yeah.
All right. And then the last one on the regular agenda is a draft resolution. This is the city requesting the state to transfer ownership of University Settlement Camp to the city. And Nick or Chris, you want to tell us about that resolution?
Want me to start?
Sure, why don't you start now, Joe? Thank you.
So many of you know that we, the city took operation and maintenance of the former University Settlement Camp in 2007 through a 20-year lease with New York State Parks. And that lease, the first 20-year term is coming up in 2027. It's renewable for another 20 years. But the arrangement comes with a lot of strings, and our taxpayers have basically been paying for the investments. And we really are limited in what we can do because some of the things that we'd like to invest in have a probable useful life that's longer than the lease. And the other thing is just a simple matter of fairness. Should the city be investing city taxpayer funding into a state facility? So we have asked, we've had a conversation for about a year with state parks on whether they would transfer this 50-acre property to the city in fee. We were finally told it's gone far enough along that they're confident that it can be done. And so they've asked us to do a formal resolution seeking that. Any final transfer would be at more than a year off, but it gets the ball rolling on it. And what that allows us to do is start to plan for the capital needs of that facility, including water, wastewater, ground improvements, structures, roofs.
Right, so a resolution is that next necessary first step where the state requires that the municipality express in writing an interest, and that interest has to come from the legislative body, and that's why a resolution is required from the council. And so in the resolution that's being drafted, it sets forth sort of the history, as Chris has explained, and the benefits to both the maintenance of the park and to the city and the state for the city to then take ownership of that. If a resolution is adopted, then gets sent to your local state and assembly as well as the governor's office, who will then work with the New York State Department that's charged with maintaining the property now, and then there will be discussions with the New York State Office of General Services, which is sort of the owner on behalf of the state of the property. There are then discussions with the New York State Attorney General's office, and eventually they'll come back where we'll have to adopt a resolution then accepting the offer and entering into a contract to acquire that property from the state, which we're hoping and anticipating to get for $1 for no consideration, because this will continue to be of a benefit to the state, the county, and the city and the residents.
And we have no intention to use it for anything other than park and recreation uses. So we would preserve the use forever. But it lets us really kind of improve something where many of the systems are long beyond their useful life. And also make improvements to the pool. You may remember we delayed some critical improvements, and that was really around this reason.
I can add, I happened to run into the head of the Parks and Recs region a couple weekends ago, and she said the process is still moving along. So she said she was short legal staff or something, but it keeps moving ahead on their end, and this is the step they're asking us to do next.
And I want to thank both Parks and Governor Hochul's staff for helping to push this along.
Yeah.
Because absent their support, we wouldn't have gotten this far.
And you've hinted at this, Chris, but just to say it explicitly, that particularly the first summer, and it sounds like probably after that, that the current uses that we have, like the pool, like camp at the camp, would not be expected to change.
Correct.
That those would continue.
No, and in fact, we've been investing further in those. So you may recall this summer we went from 2 sessions of 2-week camp to 3 sessions of 2-week camp. We made the pool more accessible for low-income families by making it $20 for the year for a household. And we didn't really ask what a household was. So we essentially made it so anybody can go swim there, and we've been giving free swim lessons. We've been helping people get their lifeguard status. So all of that will continue, and hopefully more.
Right, and we can certainly do operational expense there, but the concept of doing a major capital expenditure without having some certainty as to the long-term status is tougher, right? So,
Like, we really should connect the whole facility to our sewer system. It's not connected to our sewer system. And I don't even know the condition of all those septics or where they go.
I bet the neighbors across the street might know.
No, they don't. Look, if it was a bigger problem, I don't need to go looking for problems. They come and knock at the door.
Yes, if the downhill neighbors aren't complaining, then we don't
No.
need to.
But again, it limits our capacity to do things there. We have to shut off the water in the winter. We have no heat in a number of the buildings. Some of the roofs really are just patched, and at some point you have to actually replace the roof.
if you want to know where a big stormwater pipe ends up, I can show you. So, that goes right through the lot. So,
But I think this is exciting because we can really start to make that shine. I mean, I worked at the camp back in the 1990s, and it was in poor condition then. A lot of stuff had been done by volunteers. A lot of the cabins meet no building codes whatsoever and are on literally their last leg. And I think we can turn some attention to this and really make it shine. It's a beautiful property. It deserves, it deserves investment.
Yeah, and I'm thinking too, I think because there are some trailheads that exist
Yes.
there in the back, so just as opportunities, it may be to kind of take some relief off of the popular Mount Beacon site and something that could
And we've
be
been
further
hesitant
enhanced,
to
too.
really formalize that because we need upgrades to the access road in. I'd like to have full-time bathrooms up there. Again, we can welcome people, but you have to be ready to welcome people.
you will discover in the next budget that any money for this isn't in this budget. May not be in the next one either, but we will get there. And, we're planning for the future, so.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone good? So the last item is I'll look for a motion and a second to go into executive session to discuss contracts, do no further business, come out and adjourn.
Motion to go in executive session to discuss contracts and to come out and do no further business afterwards.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those online? Looking for a,
Aye.
okay, that was Paloma.
Aye.
All right, thank you both. And do you know how to get back on? Or are they staying
Yes,
on?
I have the link. Thank you.
All right, so we'll see you all in a minute. Thank you.